Laura, the place is looking pretty nice in here today.
Yeah, I thought I'd just add a few things here and there, kind of make it a bit more peaceful in here.
Sort of shalami.
What?
Shalami. Shalam.
Shalom?
Shalam.
You mean shalom?
Shalom.
Shalom.
Shalom?
Shalom.
I don't even know how to say it.
It said shalom.
Okay, shalom, but what does it actually mean?
Well, shalom is a Hebrew word that's usually translated into English as peace, but it means a lot more than we understand peace to mean.
Okay, smarty pants, so why don't you tell us the full story?
Well, when we think about peace, we usually think about the absence of some sort of negative force, like the absence of violence or the absence of war. But shalom is the presence of something really positive. It's all relationships and all things working together for the good of everything else.
So that sounds a little bit like God's project in history to make everything right again.
Yeah, so why don't we have a look at that? Basically, there are 4 foundational relationships that God wants to make whole and that we as Christians are called to strive towards. Our relationship with God, knowing that we're loved and we belong to Him. Our relationship with ourselves, knowing who we are and caring for ourselves. Our relationship with other people and treating them in ways that bestow dignity and worth. And our relationship with the rest of creation. Things like utilizing the land and resources in a sustainable way so that there is enough to go around. This in turn means that economic, political, social, and religious systems that these relationships make up are just and good and glorifying to God, and don't exploit anyone or any group in any way.
That sounds beautiful, Laura. And in fact, I'd love to live in a world like that. But it seems to me that that's not something I've heard spoken about much in church circles or around Christians. I've heard an awful lot about that first relationship that's primary with God. And I've heard a little bit about our relationships with each other. But as for these other 2 relationships, not so much. And I know that the relationship with God is super important. I'm also very aware that it's very important that we talk to others about that as well. But it would seem to me that unless you actually understand where the other 2 relationships come in as well, you end up with a disunited, disharmonious world. You get brokenness, you get poverty, you get wars, you get bullying, you get gangland stuff, you get all the stuff that's happening with ICs, you get refugee problems because the system is broken. So maybe these 4 foundational relationships not working together is the root of where poverty and injustice comes from.
So this has real implications for who we think the poor are and what we think poverty is. And so we're going to spend some time unpacking that. What is poverty?
Right, let's talk about that. So, you've had a chance to think and reflect, and have you worked it out? Do you know where poverty comes from? Because you see, many of us in the Western world tend to view poverty in very material terms. And that's why so many of our solutions involve building things or fixing things or sending money to things. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'd be very interested to find out what those who live in material poverty actually think about this for themselves, how they describe their situation.
That's a really good question. And at the turn of the last century, the World Bank did a study, and they collected the voices of over 60,000 men and women who live in situations of material poverty.
So what did they say?
Well, check this out. In a book called When Helping Hurts, written by Stephen Corbett and Brian Fickert, they write that if you ask people who live in low-income countries, they by and large describe their condition in psychological and social terms. While they recognize their material lack, they talk more about things like shame, inferiority, powerlessness, humiliation, fear, hopelessness, depression, social isolation, and voicelessness.
Laura, I find those words incredibly powerful and moving. I mean, that's not about just not having money in your pocket. That goes right to the heart of who you are as a human being. I mean, those are words of powerlessness, and that's a lack of dignity and worth. It's the way we want to be treated. Why would we not expect everybody else to have that dignity and worth as well?
Yeah, and so maybe we need to redefine poverty.
Well, in order to do that, let's bring back a familiar diagram, but this time with a bit of a twist. Now, we explained how things should be when we first saw these 4 foundational relationships, but now let's look at how things actually are today. So as you unpack this, you can see that the broken lines reflect the reality of broken relationships in a broken world. Now, from a Christian perspective, the foundation of our faith is based on the understanding that our relationship with God has been broken. That's why Jesus came and died. But this also affected how we view ourselves, how we view others, in fact, how we view the whole of creation. We would classify the broken relationships as the root of the problem, and the symptoms would manifest differently for each one of these relationships. A broken relationship with God results in what we call a poverty of spiritual intimacy. That's anything from denying God's existence and authority to materialism, but it could also be how we worship the idols of this age that are all around us. Now, these broken relationships also impact the way we view others, and we can call this a poverty of community. Now, this shows up in things like self-centeredness, selfishness, and exploitation or abuse of other people.
And finally, our broken relationship with all of creation, or what has been called poverty of stewardship. This is seen in a loss of sense of purpose, how we view our work, either in laziness or workaholism, materialism, or our general exploitation of the resources we've been entrusted to steward, which has resulted in environmental degradation.
So basically, these 4 relationships form the foundation of all of our systems. And if the relationships are broken, the systems are broken as well. And you can see that all around the world with the way the world isn't working at the moment, whether it's internationally or whether it's in our own backyards. Things are broken and the world isn't as it should be.
Yeah, and from this perspective, because of the brokenness and lack of shalom in the world, we're all incapable of being completely who God created us to be, because we all experience brokenness in some way.
Well, it's true, because who's experienced a broken relationship in their life?
Well, everyone.
Exactly, and as Christians, we're used to talking about that brokenness in terms of our relationship with God. But it's our brokenness with ourselves, with our family, with our friends, and with the very world around us.
Yeah, you can't live in the world without seeing evidence of broken political and economic systems and the environmental degradation that's all around us. And this changes everything. It changes how we view ourselves, it changes who we think of as the poor, and it changes the attitude with which we engage in poverty issues.
Now, this is pretty big stuff, because if what we're saying is right, we're all poor. We're all in poverty of one form or another, not just those people we see on TV or in the leaflets that come through our door. We're all broken and we're all poor. So as we close this session, we want you to take a look at some questions to discuss this, because these issues need to be grounded in our own lives. So let's talk about this. Okay.
Yeah.
What would help you? What I've often wanted to know that.
Nothing.
Seriously.
I often want to know that about you too. What would help you?
Sorry, do that again.
Oh, that's what they all say.
And you would know.
Is that, yeah.
No, it was okay.
No, you get to just, well, I'm in with your smarts this time, actually. So smarty pants.
Okay, sorry, brain fight. Right, do it again. Sorry, you're a rock star.
I was also a little excited about the
That was more to do with the fact that she was really happy that I got slapped.
Deferred.